G'day and welcome to this little chat on skew chisels. I watched a lot of YouTube videos and found that people say, oh, this is how you use it, but they don't go into the whys or the wherefores of why you use it that particular way. So hopefully what I endeavour to do today is to try and explain the science and the mechanics behind the tool. Now, unfortunately, most clubs and things these days don't teach how to use the skew chisel because most people are scared of it. They end up just being left in racks, or as a friend of mine does, he reckons they make great tomato steaks. And that's sad really, because it's one of the best tools. And by the way, I don't advocate that if you can't use a skew you can't turn. I know some very good turners that do not use a skew at all. But they are trying to learn. So that's good. Rightio. Chisels come in various sizes, from little mini tools like this 1/4 inch one here, up to 2 inches wide. You don't see many 2-inch skew chisels around these days, but anyway. The most common one, of course, is the inch or the 30mm. And if you're a beginner, I recommend that you either get an inch skew chisel or a 30mm skew chisel. It gives you a little bit of playroom, which we'll see a bit later. Now, the most common skews around up until a few years ago were just a rectangular bar like this one here. This one's actually bowler S7 steel. They came with very sharp edges down along here. Now, you had to break those edges off so that the skew can ride along the tool rest nice and easily. You do not want any nicks or anything that the skew can catch on when you're using, because it is a sliding motion, and even though the cutting edge is not supported by the edge down here, it is still important because that must move easily along the tool rest. And all tool rests should be filed and polished off anyway before you start. Now, in later years, in the last probably 15-20 years, P&N in Australia started rounding off the bottom corner down here so that it didn't catch on anything. Hamlet, which one this one is, rounds off both corners like that, and I think that's becoming the norm in most skew chisels these days. It has a rounded edge. I personally don't like the back edge rounded over because I like to sit it flat on the rest when I'm doing V cuts. The other style of skew is this one, the oval skew. I'm not going to talk much about it, and because this is a public video I can't really say what I think about it, but it is the most useless tool foisted onto the wood turning public for a number of reasons. Where you want bevel support behind your cutting edge here to do V cuts and planing cuts down the end of a cylinder, you can't. It's got nothing there to hold it there. It is awkward to sharpen because it wants to rock like this on the tool rest, on the platform when you're sharpening it. Some people love them, I absolutely hate them. And the other thing from a production point of view is that they tend to flutter a little bit when you're using them, if you get them off the rest a little bit. So we won't discuss that one anymore. Now, as you can see, they're all sharpened a little bit differently in most cases. This one's a curved one, of course, which I play with occasionally. But generally, it's a bit of steel with a bevel on both ends, on both sides of it, to achieve a cutting edge up here. I tend to favour shorter handles like this. This is the European style of handle, because I tend to hold the skew up there. Some people like longer handles, because I can sit it against their body tightly, and you'll still find that most of them hold it up here. But then you get onto this one, which has got a fair bit of weight here, and remember that turning is all about physics, it's all about leverage. When you get over that tool rest, which is your fulcrum, and you put the load on, which is the timber that you're turning, then you need an equal or better hold down here to stop it from riding over the tool rest and ending up in disaster. So it all depends on the weights of the tools and everything else. as to how you like your handles and your personal preferences. This one I use mainly for fine work, up to 3 inches, or chair legs and table legs and things like that. This one I use on really big stuff, up to 15, 18 inches in diameter sometimes if I want a really smooth cut on it. It's not for the faint-hearted, I might mention. Okay, now we'll get on with how the tool is used on the lathe. Let's have a look at this mongrel tool, the skew chisel, shall we? Now, we have a sharp end and a blunt end, but I must admit sometimes it's hard to tell the difference with some I've seen. We have the toe or the long point, the heel or the short point, and on each edge here, 4 of them, we have shoulders, which can be very handy for certain cuts sometimes, or scraping. Now, that is the skew angle down there, and that's where it gets its name from, and that can vary from 10 to 45 degrees. I've found the optimum is 20 to 30 degrees for most people, and if you're a complete beginner, 20 degrees is the easiest to use. If you have it ground straight across, it's a straight across chisel. So, now, then we have the bevel angle down here. Now the bevel angle is normally 1.5 to twice the thickness. So if you have a tool that's 6 millimeters thick here, that bevel angle, the length of the bevel should be about 9 millimeters. If it's twice, it's 12 millimeters. I find that if you get it twice with a very long bevel on it, it becomes a little bit grabby and catches a lot easier when you're making your entry cuts. So if you're having trouble with that, shorten the bevel back to about 1.5. On most of our Australian hardwoods, you've got to use 1.5 anyway, because at twice, it just knocks the edge off too quickly. It's just too fine. So, now, that's what happens if you run into the headstock. This is what happens if you drop it. It always lands on the point. So, don't drop it, it's the easiest answer, or put it in a place where it can't roll. Now in normal circumstances, the cutting edge is supported by the tool rest. And by that I mean, if you're using a gouge like this, here's your cutting edge down along here, and it should be supported on the tool rest behind the cutting edge. If you get off that cutting edge and you start getting up the tool, the only option it has is to catch, and it will spin it around like that on the tool rest. Now this is where the skew chisel breaks all the rules, because the cutting edge can't be supported by the tool rest. So you have the tool rest sitting against this short point down here just on one edge, and you're cutting in this area here. So the only thing that is supporting that cut is the bevel behind it, there, where it's rubbing. Once you understand that, the rest becomes fairly easy. Get it off the bevel, and it starts looking for its own support, like 50% of Australians. So, bevel is king. Keep that bevel rubbing, and you will not have any great problems with it. Now, the cutting area on the chisel is between the short point and 2/3 of the way up the chisel, up the cutting edge here. If you start getting into this 1/3 area up the top here, you are courting disaster. You will have nothing but catches. And the only way you can do that is to move your body with the chisel. If it starts at that angle there, it must finish at that angle over there or down here or wherever. As soon as you start just standing still and pulling it with your hands and create an arc like that, it will catch. There is no question about it, because you start bringing the top corner or the long point or toe into play, and it will grab on the timber. I will show that later. So, remember, bevel is king. Rub that bevel on the work, like that, to give it full support. Don't lift it off like that. That's where catches occur, because it's unsupported, and it will start wanting to dig in and the normal result is that it spirals back down the work, which I will show a little later on. So we'll just move over to the whiteboard now and discuss the various these are the grinds put on the skew angle down here. This is a traditional grind, just virtually straight across like that, angle 10 to 45 degrees. If you get it down around the 45 here, like that, it makes it very, very hard. You've got to alter your stance and everything else and the way you use the chisel to get it to cut properly. So it's really a bad idea, in my opinion, going that far. And last 20 years or so, we've had the curved edge on the cutting edge there, and they both work equally as well. I don't like the curved edge much because I find that it tends to hide the long point sometimes when you're trying to make V-cuts. Just depends on where you put your head, I suppose. But in America, Alan Lacer has made that section now about 1/3 across, flat 90 degrees there, and then starts a curve down there. His reasoning is that that is great for doing tenons and things, and to a certain extent it is. It makes it much easier trying to do a tenon with that than with this. With this one here, when you're making a cut into the end grain of a piece of timber to put a tenon on here like that, it wants to dive in underneath the thing and undercut that a lot. Or either that or you end up with a tenon that's shaped like that. With a little bit of practice, it doesn't take much to start getting it flat. So that's really a no-brainer there. Now, the next part of it is the grind's actually on the bevel itself. I'll pull this off. Now I'm talking about this here, this part up here, the bevel itself. There's really only about 3 that you can do. There's a traditional one that's the shape off the grinder where you get a concave cut in here. Now, 6 or 8 inch grinder, it doesn't matter much. The only difference is that there's about 2 thou. If you drew a straight line down there and measured between there and there, a 6 inch grinder gives a slightly deeper curve than an 8 inch grinder. But the difference on a 5/16 or 8 mil bevel length there is 2 thou. It's hardly worth worrying about. If you've got a 6 inch grinder, don't get rid of it just to get an 8 inch grinder because everybody says 8 inch is better. I don't find much difference. I use both around here. In fact, for 40 years all I had, or 30 years or so, all I had was a 6 inch grinder. It's all I could afford. Now, the next one is a straight bevel like that, which is done on a belt sander or an edge grinding wheel. Don't ever grind on the edge of a wheel. They're not made to take it, but that's another story. The biggest problem I find with this is that if you're a little bit heavy-handed, this is your platen on your belt sander, is that if you push heavily, you end up raising the belt a little bit above it and it tends to round that point over. And I've found that with some people when they're sharpening and they can't get it to cut properly, that's exactly what's happened. The belt's getting a bit blunt or something, they push a little bit heavier to make the grind, and it builds up in front of the wheel, in front of the edge there, and just rounds it over. I personally don't like a flat grind. I don't know why, it's probably me. I prefer this grind here. Maybe it's because I learnt to turn with that one. But I find that this one with the flat grind tends to bite quicker than this type here. You can't sort of get a feel for it over the bevel, over the edge here when you go to apply the chisel. Now the last one is a convex one like this, popularised by Eli Avicera in Israel. I've tried that and I find it very difficult to use to do beads and things like that because there's no bevel support really behind here. and it's either in or out. Now when you're sharpening these, excuse me, the grind should go from here to there in one continuous line. No facets, no misfits or anything else. Once you get that part there right, the other thing is that this tip here should be exactly in the centre line of the chisel from there to there. So it should be equal there from the centre line there. The other problem that people seem to have when sharpening them is that they get the bevels uneven. So you've got your cutting edge down here, and in theory that line across the chisel there, this is your bevel down here, should be parallel with this one here. What I've seen some do is that you end up with either a bevel that runs across like that, or the other way, back like that. And all it does is it just creates absolute havoc because there's not enough bevel support anywhere on the thing. Although there are some that grind them deliberately like that. Why, I don't know, but anyway, I find that the traditional way of doing it, having them straight across, parallel with each other like that, is far better in the thing. The other thing you've got to watch out is on the end of the chisel, here, is that you keep that straight down the centre, not angled across like that or the other way, because it alters the whole way you've got to use the chisel when you roll it over to do the opposite cut. Right, well that pretty well covers all the sharpening angles and everything on everything. Now we'll get on to the different types of skew